it's an honor to be here. A few of us had a chance to have dinner last night, and I shared this curve that I typically have when you accept invitations to do things, that 1 year out, 9 months out, it sounds really exciting, and as you get closer and closer to that date, you wonder why the version of you 9 months ago said yes, and you start to think about things you're going to have to reschedule and the inconvenience of it and what have you. And obviously I wouldn't be sharing that story if that was the case. But in this particular case, as I found out more and more about the kind of ethos behind this event, and less about what it was actually going to be like, I found that nice and disquieting, which was good. But I actually got more and more excited about what this was all going to be, and I actually realized only now do I have any clue as to what's actually about to happen. So, we're all in this together. Okay. So, it's good to start in the beginning. So this, I'm the one in blue here, less superhero-like, and then my older brother would be, Kevin would be the one with the cape and water wings. My father is an orthopedic surgeon, was a practicing orthopedic surgeon, and did his residency in Toronto, and this would have been somewhere on fellowship. We're estimating it's New Jersey, because that's probably where my mom stayed with four of us that were all under the age of, three of us all under the age of 5, while my dad spent the week in at Columbia University, and then would come back out to the campground for the weekend, which is how he ran his fellowship time for those 3 months. And this was the world that I entered into. This is my uncle in black and white, and this is my father studying for exams, somewhere between the written and the oral. His outfit obviously helps date the photo. I am somewhat concerned that he's still working on the osteology of the forearm, or he may have just switched to air guitar at this point. But this was the culture that I understood of orthopedics from the perspective of the young child that you saw before. And I think this was that photo of John. I think was probably taken in actually I think I know that call room on Bond Street at St. Mike's, and was some article in the Toronto Star about the life of a resident, and that would have been probably back in the 80s or so. I went along through all of this, all of my med school. I decided I wanted to be one of these guys for some reason, and at the interview in Calgary, I don't know if they still do this, but it used to be a fairly, the ratio of interviewers to interviewee was heavily weighted in favor of the interviewer. So there would be a horseshoe of about 16 people, and there would be one person kind of sitting in the middle. And for people who know Norm Shacker, he certainly would come up with interesting questions, and he turned to me and he said, all right, Lucas, how will you judge success in your career? This was my, to get into residency in Calgary, that would have been the question that I needed to answer. And for some reason, I don't know why, on that particular day, I made up some comment about work-life balance. I thought that was the most important thing for me to tell a prospective residency program that I was looking to find before I even got in. And it's probably why I did my residency in Vancouver. So you can jump in here at any time, Jay.
I think you're going to be a great
storyteller. I feel
like
this is in conversation with myself. I feel a little bit like talking to my canoe. I'm talking to my paddle.
Don't take that personally.
All right. So I'm not sure I found work-life balance during my residency. I kept looking for it. And then I went to my first American Academy meeting in San Diego. I was very excited about this. And this is by no means, how can I say this without it sounding bad to our generous exhibitors that are outside the room. If anyone's been to the American Academy, it's a bit of a show. right? It's a certain kind of show, and it's sometimes that you kind of need to escape from it a little bit. And I even was feeling that as a resident. So I took off one afternoon playing hooky from the American Academy and met this guy. He wasn't surfing at the time. He was trying to sell me a pair of jeans that I didn't need, and I bought them. And we've been together for 12 years now. And I would not have met him had I not cut out of the American Academy that afternoon in order to go do what felt like I needed to do at that particular time. So this was probably my first little awareness that sometimes you have to do kind of what the heart wants and not necessarily what the brain says that you should do. Everything was going awesome. I had residency all sorted. I had my fellowships all lined up. I was going to spend an extra 6 months in Vancouver doing sports. I was going to do another 6 months down in Melbourne, Australia, and then a year in Dallas, and the world was ahead of me. What could go wrong? And, you know, into every life a little rain must fall. We've heard that theme a few times today, and I got really, really sick. I started to feel unwell. This was about 2 months into my fellowship. Fought off going to any hospitals for all the reasons that we all do, and arrived there with a temperature of 40.7 and a hemoglobin of 72. And I thought, that should, probably get me in quicker. And up until, earlier that day, I had wondered whether I should go to the hospital or not. So it's a little wild when you think about that. And I spent the next 3 or 4 days pretty sure that I was dying, and everybody around me was pretty sure that's what's happening, especially in terms of where people were flying from and who was doing the talking, and I was pretty out of it. My hemoglobin got down to about 50. They transfused me, put me on a bunch of pretty hefty medications, and tried to figure out what was wrong with me. And I spent the next 4 weeks as an inpatient in the hospital that I did my residency. There's advantages to that, you know where everything is. There's disadvantages to that because the perspective of the ceiling kind of going by you like that, or who you run into in the cafeteria, isn't as lighthearted as it felt in those 5 years previous. So my life took a bit of a turn before I thought it had kind of started what I was planning to do.
And at that point, were you rethinking, forget about survival, I guess that was primary. Were you rethinking your career, your path? Were you thinking back to your father, your uncle, saying, is this where I need to be and where I need to go?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't think I ever considered at that point that if I was going to make it, I was going to make it. So if I was going to recover from this, I was going to go off and do all these things, and it was just a matter of organizing. Could Melbourne just handle if I got there a month later, and could I just move this around, and could I, how could I just rejig things so that I could just keep on this trajectory? Upon reflection, I will tell you that there were definitely challenges with that approach, but at the time it seemed like the most level-headed way to handle it. Interestingly, I applied for the job that I ended up getting in Toronto from the hospital bed in Vancouver, stealing Wi-Fi from the Starbucks across the street, with a CV that I think was about 3.5 pages, and mostly related to summer camp and other things like that. So I'm not sure how that all worked out, but it did. So it's interesting how these things sometimes kind of play out. So, trudged through 18 months or so of fellowship, started working in Toronto. This is both the size, both in number and height of some of our trainees, especially when they stand around me. Yeah, everything was awesome. Living the life, no problems. Everything, all the challenges of first year of practice. For those of you who have done that already, awesome. For those of you who found that hard and didn't tell anybody about that, probably talk to somebody about that at some point. And for those of you who are about to head into it, either coming out of residency or fellowship, I can say that my first year of practice was the hardest year of my entire trajectory. Now, I don't know whether that was some of my personal experience. I guess all I have is my own personal experience, but I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk about all these different transition phases, but first year practice is a particularly tough one, and one that I think we should probably, as an organization, an association, spend a little more time supporting and talking about.
What they don't know about you, unless you're going to speak about it later, is the fact that you are an Ironman triathlete.
I wasn't yet. I wasn't at this point.
Okay.
I mean, I guess, yeah.
Okay, so that's coming a little later.
Huh.
Huh.
I didn't send these to him.
No, he didn't.
Maybe I should have. I think this was somewhere along that, are you happy? Yes or no. If you're not, or if you are, keep doing what you're doing. If you're not, change something. And one of the things that I had always wanted to do, and in fact had been training for when I first got sick, was to do a triathlon. I always thought that would be really cool. And so, of course, I started doing them, and being, type A, just doing a try isn't enough. You have to do something a little bit more, then you have to qualify for some kind of national level thing or world championship, and this one was my first full Ironman in Whistler. This must have been on the first lap of the 2-lap running course, because I'm still smiling. Or I'm grimacing, I don't know. But that was for anybody who's taken on any, and we've talked about physical challenges and the mental aspect of them, and I think everyone has their own perspective on this. But for me, what I loved finding out, and we'll get to this in a second from a different perspective, is it's amazing to get this. I think I was 40 at the time, and to find out at age 40, after living in this, bag of bones for the last 39 years, that there were things inside me that I didn't know were there. Because you kind of think you've figured out all the nooks and crannies of yourself. And throwing that kind of adversity at yourself is a very, it becomes a self-exploration. And you go through some pretty interesting chapters, and you revisit some adversity that you faced in the past, and you set some goals for the future. But all in all, it's just kind of a fun way to spend a day running around, hoping there's no bears on your route. There was a bear on the route this day, but after this morning's talk, I really can't kind of spend any time talking about that. Okay. So the other thing that I was kind of doing around the same time was really getting into surfing on the Great Lakes. Now, I'm sure all of you know about this. Many of you probably do it already. But if you don't, I certainly made it through most of my life not knowing that the lakes got wavy enough to create surfable waves. I will admit I was one of those people that was laughing when the waves were rolling in at Great Bear Lake, because I kind of looked at that and said, yeah, there's probably enough distance there that by the time you get to there, those are going to be pretty wild waves. And that's only twice the size of Lake Ontario, let alone Superior or Huron. So this is up in Kincardine at the pier, and this was a little hobby that I started because it turns out I wasn't a very good surfer, and trying to keep up with my surfer husband, it was a good idea for me to take up surf photography. So and that was really more as a relationship solution than as a aspirational goal. So yeah, where things come from, you don't have to always kind of be afraid of. You kind of get pushed into something or encouraged into something, or you pick something up. I literally picked up a camera because I was pissed off that I couldn't surf and wasn't really receptive to any more coaching that day. So thought if I went and did something myself, that maybe I would at least find some peace and quiet. So that's what I did. So yeah, I got into surf photography, and that took me all sorts of fun places. It started just shooting my friends, and then we'd go on trips, and then on trips you would get the opportunity to shoot a competition, and I started to develop an artistic perspective that I never, once again, knew that I had. I thought that I was just this science guy and, did an Ironman to prove that I could and would just kind of keep my head down and keep operating. Liked my interactions with patients, but always thought that I was trying to fit into a mold that somebody else had kind of laid out for me. It probably related to those two somewhat unhappy-looking men in one of those earlier slides. Not Norm. He was always smiling. This was probably the first photo I ever took where I thought that I actually had a perspective that other people didn't have, both physically in this particular location, but was able to express something artistically that I wasn't just capturing what had happened. I mean, you can read into this photo if you like, but chances are I was just standing on the pier at the right time when a bunch of people were doing kind of a crazy thing. This one took, everything being right, took obviously a lot of luck, but then it pushed me to start to think about how I could change the perspective of how I was seeing things. Got to go, the opportunity to go shoot. Actually, I think was this the year we met, or and I booked my flight to, this was the WSL, which is basically the NHL of surfing. This was their junior division. If you're ever trying to look to get into something, getting in at the junior level is always easier. And so I offered up my services to go down and shoot in Barbados, which is actually the break where I first picked up a camera and said, well, I'd be happy to come down and take some photos of your competition. And they said, well, we can't pay you. And I said, that's fine. Got a pretty good day job. I mean, I'll come down for the weekend. I knew somebody I could stay with, and so I got to, literally jump in and be, shooting in this pro competition as a photographer because of these skills that I had developed over the last couple of years.
So Lucas, this is recent, is it? I mean, I pictured a little Lucas Murnaghan running around with a little Polaroid camera when you were a kid.
Yeah. I mean, I probably did, like everybody else, have a camera when I was a kid. Certainly we put a lot of emphasis on visual capturing of events. I mean, we were a photo album family, we were a slideshow family after trips, the carousels, that kind of thing. Never really thought of it from an artistic perspective, more of a kind of a documentarian perspective. And then it probably wasn't until social media came along where there actually was a repository for me to put these images once I'd taken them. Because if I was just putting them on the hard drive of my computer, well, kind of who cared? It was nice to be able to put them up somewhere and have people say, hey, this is really interesting, or I noticed you did this, or I liked it. That we've started to learn the other edge of that knife over the last little while, and I certainly have some perspective on that we probably won't get into today, but there is something about putting your stuff out there and getting some call and response. It's like performing live. It's reading your work. It's presenting your paper as opposed to talking about it or just publishing it. Podium versus poster. There is something about putting it out there and opening yourself up to feedback, whether that's virtual or in person. But yeah, this was about 3 years ago in Barbados.
Oh, recent.
Yeah. So as with anything, you just, like, the mountains have to get bigger, the waves. This wave probably was bigger than I should have been swimming around in retrospect. At the time, it seemed reasonable. This is the kind of shot that you would typically get from a boat. This is in Puerto Escondido, which is known as the pipeline of Mexico. This is a pretty medium day. These waves are probably between 15 and 18 foot. I swam out there noticing that I was the only one that was swimming out, and there were a lot of land photographers on the beach saying things, some in Spanish, with some in English, but all seemingly mocking what I was trying to do, which of course made me want to do it more. And so I got out there, and it was amazing. And once you're out there, things are quite calm because you just rise and fall, you know, a few stories up and down relative to the shore. But it wasn't until an Australian surfer came over to me, having broken his board, as one is apt to do when the waves are this size. And he asked me, he said, I won't do an Australian accent, but his direct statement was, any tips on getting in? I thought, I hadn't thought about that part. Because getting out is kind of the easy part. You can duck under these waves, even when they're that big. But there's no ducking under them coming in. And if there's no channel, which there isn't there, a channel is kind of a riptide that takes you out as a way that you can kind of come back in. And a surfer can surf in, but a water photographer can only bob in. Bobbing from the top of that to the bottom of that can be dangerous. So, I mean, I'm wearing a helmet during all this, and of course that makes it safer. But what you catch a smaller set in, and you kind of cross your fingers, and when land, you know, appears under your toes, you start running, and that went okay. It turns out that this is Oscar Moncada, who is a WSL big wave surfer, a local legend. And 5 months after this photo was taken, he was tragically killed in a car accident, of all things, not doing what he loved. And this was the image that they used at his memorial. And he probably had a lot of surf photos taken of him, so I was pretty honored by that, but obviously tragic to him and to his family. And it was somewhere around this point that I realized that I was probably, this trajectory that I was on with surf photography may not be sustainable. I don't know if it was when he died or some other kind of combination of things, but it kind of brought this mortality into this whole phenomenon and said, maybe going a little bit beyond my depth with this and might kind of find something different to do.
And with this, clearly you have a level of comfort with the water, right? Having been on 5 surf trips myself, I understand. I would never go in that kind of water. But you're a free diver as well.
Yeah.
Does that play into this?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think the one thing that I've probably left out of all of this is that, you know, there are people who are in the water from day one, and there's people who aren't, and I was probably thrown in the deep end or the lake or what have you. And then just from that point on, any memory that I have as a kid, you know, water was connected. And that's why I used that opening slide from that pool in New Jersey before I was even allowed in the water, because the diapers were under my bathing suit. That was central to, and whether it was, you know, canoeing or kayaking or summer camp or playing water polo or lifeguarding or all those things, that's where I was most comfortable. So interestingly, this thing that I did all throughout my childhood, which I had kind of gotten away from during my residency, during all of these times, started to kind of work its way back into my life. It was more, I learned how to do photography. I learned photography being in the water. I never learned photography separately and then learned how to be in the water separately. I actually figured out how to do photography while I was floating around, which is probably not the easiest way to learn how to do it, but it paid off in the end.
Do you still wear floaties?
Do I still wear floaties? Has anybody seen that video of the kid trying to eat the banana with the floaties on his arms? Talking about memes? Okay, please, at lunchtime, everybody look up child trying to eat banana, or do it right now. Child trying to eat banana with floaties on his arms, and you'll never look at either, but it's super cute. It's a good diet technique, though. So let's see here. Okay. So it's around this time, and I think it was related to, it was this trip, probably more, these it might be a little bit out of sequence. But this was the trip that I went and I shot this pro competition in the best place in the world, and I loved all the photos that I got, and all the guys wanted were, did you get that one did you get the shot of that aerial in the final? Did you, or that, we like that shot, but you can't see the logo, or this one. And I was like, well, yeah, but what about like these kinds of shots? Don't you like these ones? And they're like, no, we don't want any more. We don't want any of those. We want, more stuff like this. And this kind of stuff was great, but it probably wasn't sustainable. My partner was just about to have, or I think just about to, or had just had back surgery, and just a little, spondy, a little spondy. That's how I'm supposed to describe it, but just didn't want to make it sound more dramatic than it was. And I was clear that we weren't going to be traveling for a little while, so I just wanted to get in the pool more and shoot a bit more. And so I reached out or get into the water more and shoot a bit more. So I reached out to our swim team, the U of T swim team, and to a water polo team, and just asked them if I could come to practice. I took a bunch of photos underwater, realized I was just taking pictures of people swimming underwater, which wasn't particularly, it was fun, but it wasn't particularly interesting for me or I think anybody else. And then I just took that photo one day, and something clicked, something kind of went off in my mind. It seemed to kind of connect with a bunch of different parts of my life, and forced me to move in a direction where I was starting to see images in my head, whether it was consciously or subconsciously, and then trying to create them. So instead of, sitting down, instead of, kind of, let's make a good idea, it was kind of like live your life, think your thoughts, dream your dreams, and when something formulates in your head, then try to figure out how to create that image in order to portray that. So I think this is when I switched from kind of taking photos to, to making photos, if that language is not too, perfect. But.
Up till this point, you've developed this all on your own through your life journey.
Yeah.
Were you looking, or did you have mentors? I know in some of your past work you've talked about Robert Mapplethorpe and the Bob Miser Foundation and whatnot. So where did they come in and influence you?
Just like for all of you, as you go through, it's who do you find yourself learning from, and then who do you gravitate towards? I don't know, has anybody ever been assigned a mentor? You ever had an assigned mentor program, either in medical school or residency?
We have one here.
Yeah. I never found the assigned mentor program to be very effective. I think the organic mentor program is incredible. It creates these moments like we just had of kind of recognition, or of people coming back 30 years later and saying, this is, you said this one thing to me this one time, and I carried that my entire career. To me, that's what mentorship or leadership is, and that's hard to design. I have been described as a self-taught photographer, which I've always thought was a very, it's a bit grand, because in 2019, if you have YouTube and you have access to a couple people who are photographers and you read a few books, is that any different than someone else who's doing some online courses or is going to a community college or is doing something else? So I think self-directed, maybe, but self-taught seemed a little bit grandiose. But yeah, I definitely found people along the way. My brother's a photographer. I have family members who are photographers. I have some of my best friends are artists, and so therefore you're kind of picking up and learning as you're going along.
Okay.
But I would say my historical references only came as I started to create the images and then realized what was subconsciously influencing them as opposed to working the other way around. I started to get into a bit of a conflict here, and we might as well talk about it a little bit more kind of overtly, just because, otherwise we'll be having lunch. So I realized I had a little bit of a duality of character here. I was the good conformist orthopedic surgery resident, thought I did well in my program, thought I was, got a good job at sick kids, was kind of playing that role, or what I thought was the role that people wanted me to play. I've already, identified that I'm gay. I have a husband. I'm fortunate to have come up in a time where I was able to, those two things were always allowed to coexist. I never knew whether there was any discrimination that happened because of it. I just never really thought that way, and that was the easier way to think about it. I'm sure there's things that haven't worked out because of that, but I'm sure there's other things that have worked out, because my dad was an orthopedic surgeon. So, choose which one you're going to get more excited about, right? Here I was starting to take these photographs, and I took this photograph, of this swimmer, and I thought to myself, well, this is really cool, but there's part of me that's like, well, this is kind of cool because not only is it mysterious and it's interesting, but there starts to be an opportunity for something to be a little bit evocative. Allows to be some vulnerability. There allows to be some artistry to it, the human form, where you start to tie in my knowledge of anatomy and my knowledge of light and other things like that, of even physics. How is he floating or is he sinking? Well, we just have to figure out the numbers and then we can get there. But I decided instead of having this split life that I was trying to keep these compartments separate, that I was allowed to have an area of my life where they actually met again. So what I'm hoping is coming through all this is that there's these moments that you think things split away, but then there's things that cross back, and you don't always know when they're going to cross back or how they're going to cross back, but you have to be, or you have the opportunity to be ready for them to. I became aware that if I wasn't going to do something that was unusual or different in this particular realm, it was never going to be of any merit or value. But I have to say, I never went into this with the goal of it being successful. This was not if I start doing underwater photos, I'm going to be talking about that sometime, on a stage in Hamilton. It turns out that I'm a far more famous underwater photographer than I am orthopedic surgeon. But it's kind of cool that you get to be both, if you can find that path. But.
So with this path, and you do adolescent sport medicine.
Yeah.
So I'm sure your patient population easily looks you up on Instagram,
yeah.
which he's blown up on, by the way.
If that's a good thing.
It's a great thing.
Yeah.
With your remarkable images as a very, very amateur photographer. How has that been received, either by colleagues at Sick Kids or U of T or your patients?
Yeah, I worried about that a lot in the beginning. I think the very first time I took a nude photo, that was not by design. That was, we were about to do this shoot in this private pool, and the subject, I don't like using the word model, but the individual that I was shooting, halfway through the shoot, just took his bathing suit off. And I thought, okay, I guess. And of course I kept taking photos and didn't really think much of it. And then I had these photos and they were beautiful, but I was like, wow, shit, I can't do anything with these. I can't show a picture. And then I thought, well,
it's been done.
Why can't I?
Yeah,
where is that line? What is this world? What is so Instagram was actually a really interesting platform because it had really clear guidelines that it thought was protecting, community standards, right? And if I just kind of tucked in behind those, and if it was good enough for Instagram, then it was not beyond reproach, but I didn't have to worry about what the hospital was going to say, or my patients were going to say, or my patients' parents were going to say. I have no idea what they've said. I have no idea whether people don't come to see me to have an operation because the first 20 images you see if you look up Lucas Murnaghan on the internet now are not, RateMD still finds its way to float to the top for some reason. It's not my published papers. It's not my most recent accolade for being a visiting professor or some research committee. It's an article about my images, and so they know what's coming. And those that do talk to me about it, some of them have bought the book. Some of them have kind of said how amazing it is. Others I don't really hear about it. But I worried about it a lot in the beginning. And I worry about it a lot less now.
Fantastic.
But I don't know whether that's. It's interesting. It's an interesting conversation. One that's probably better over a few drinks as to who are you responsible to? How separate do your lives need to be? How much are people entitled to knowing about what you do, when, where, and what is art and what is otherwise?
You title your photos.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you all know this or not, but they're well thought out. And you're one of the few people that I know that seems to speak in Finnish prose. So where does this come from? Your love of language, the spoken or written word?
So I speak in Finnish prose?
That's what it sounds like to me.
Like Finnish, like the language?
No, finished.
Oh, finished.
Yeah.
I should have sat on that side. This is
That's
my
okay.
better ear. Finished prose. Yeah, I text with a lot of periods, and some of my younger coworkers mocked me for that. They said it probably doesn't need all of that. Yeah, I don't know. I think I've always thought I was better with words than images. And so I really enjoyed giving, talks in school. I would much rather have a podium presentation than write the paper. I mean, that's maybe true of a lot of people, but no problem. Like, that would be great. But what I found with the images is that, because what I've worked to realize is that what I'm doing with these images is not just taking what I hopefully think are beautiful images, but I'm actually trying to express some thoughts and emotions that I haven't done a very good job of expressing throughout my life. So I was one of my friends who came to me very early on and said, your work is great, it's so autobiographical. And I said, autobiographical? That would mean, no, I'm taking pictures of other people. How could it be autobiographical? He said, no, well, you're expressing your emotion through the image that you're creating, and your thought and your concept. And so I realized that I was able to say things through these images that I wasn't able to say in words. But I wanted to make sure that the images were being interpreted in the right way, or at least being introduced in the right way, and therefore the captions or the titles became important for them. And it gives me a chance to use puns and 80s lyrical references and things like that that otherwise would just sit stagnant in my brain, because I don't go on long enough canoe trips for them to kind of come out again. So.
And better than Untitled #1.
Yeah, I'm not. As pretentious as I am, I'm not pretentious enough for Untitled #1. Mm-hmm. I just and sorting the images on my computer would be really confusing. So this, and then you just get to do really fun technical things, right? Like, this is in an apartment complex. Well, it's a bit of technical and serendipity. This is an apartment complex through somebody who messaged me over Instagram while I was looking for a pool in South Beach, and said, well, I've got an apartment, I'm just down the street here, why don't you come over here? It's like just over a DM, and I was like, okay. And we did this, so I'm lying flat under the water. I use no extra breathing equipment. This is just on a breath hold. Obviously, for this one, you just have to be there long enough for the bubbles to go away and for the water surface to be clear. This is using a rectilinear lens, so people who know much about photography, there's fisheye, which does that, what it looks like it's doing here, and then rectilinear, everything would be straight. So this is using a rectilinear lens, but the surface of the water is actually acting as the fisheye lens. So you get a wider field from looking up through the water. It was something that I discovered probably as a kid, looking down, realizing that you could see more when you were under the water than you could if you were just lying flat on the ground. So we just had him do this dive, and this was we did it once, and I wasn't quite sure that I got it, so I asked him to do it again, and got everything lined up, got lying down on the bottom of the pool, and it flies through the air, click, 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 splash, and then just this most god-awful cracking, crunching sound that if anyone's ever heard someone hit the bottom of a pool, that's what it sounds like. And he hit his head on the bottom of the pool. Gosh. And I'm lying there looking up, and in my brain I'm thinking, I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to see this just cloud of red coming from his head, and as I'm merging between my orthopedic surgeon brain and my photographer brain. My orthopedic surgeon brain is kind of going, oh, this is not good, and here's spinal and a head injury and this. My photographer brain is like, this blood's going to look really cool. Would I keep shooting as I'm going over towards him? Or would I put my camera away and I turn around and he was holding his head, but there was no blood, so that solved that problem. And it turned out he was okay. Interestingly, nailed it on the first take. The second take, it was awful. So we never needed to do that second shot, which often is the case. This is just, these are the some of the shots that just seem to connect with people and capture imagination. This is shooting for an entire day, not trying to get this shot, but just in the end, managed to nail this. And you can't, it looks pretty good up there. Yeah, I mean, his eyes just like perfectly, how his eyes were open and in perfect focus. But this is Daniel Jensen, who's just a very interesting character who lives in Los Angeles, and we just connected and did this. And all of these connections just kind of happen because you do it a little bit, and someone sees that you do it a little bit, and then they want to do it a little bit, and then you get to do more, and then you just kind of navigate up through all of this.
Fantastic. And
so we decided if we were doing photography and we liked surfing and that we should obviously open a surf shop in Toronto. This is an unfair photo because this is what the surf shop looks like now, and if I showed you all of the iterations of it, which included kind of a logo on a T-shirt and then all these things. But this is the other thing that we do, and I wanted to show that because this was the most recent intersection. Sorry, not sure how that got in there. More photos. Yeah, this is up. Everybody knows Tobermory. These are some of the shipwrecks that are up there. This shot required a few trips to that. The only time that you can take this shot is in September. Because that's the only time the water is warm enough. Not that it was that warm. Devin will attest to that. And it's the only other time that there aren't all the glass-bottom boats driving over top, which are really hard to navigate around, safety-wise. This is kind of that concept of where does nudity, does it make a difference? Does it change whether it's art or not? This image, obviously with a pair of board shorts wouldn't be the same. The fact that this was taken in a private Catholic school in Memphis, Tennessee, without them really knowing what it was that we were doing that day, made it all just a little bit more exciting. And the very next day, I was faculty on a course, which is why I was in Memphis, Tennessee. So this is that you can kind of, if you can dovetail your things together, it works out well. And then we decided I was going to do a show of this underwater stuff, and I was thinking about galleries and things to do it in, and I said, oh, screw it, why don't we just do it in our shop? So this busy area here that you see, right? So we said, well, we can't do a show in there because it'll just look like you're hanging your work in your surf shop. So what we did is we left the surfboards in because we thought they looked cool, and then we stripped everything out. So we took all of our retail and we created our own little pop-up, and then hung the work in there. And this was from the opening night, which was back in February. And that's where I launched my book, which if you had asked me, a few years ago if I thought that I'd be making a book, and it's down to its last 70 copies out of 500. And it's gone to 16 countries now, which is really cool, because that's the amazing thing about the internet is you get to just, you're immediately, what do you say, globally recognized? I mean, that's a nice way of putting it, because it's just by definition that's the beginning, right? And that's why. So whatever you do, whether it's art or science or athletics, there's an opportunity for things to be globally recognized from the outset if you want them to be, or and you can have a conversation that is global from the outset. And that's, I think, that's the thing I'm the most grateful for, is that it's given me the opportunity to do that. So I think that's it.
So what you may or may not know through this journey, because your website is fantastic, with the press releases that you've posted for your media.
Yeah.
He's been featured in magazines globally now.
Globally.
So
globally.
He's absolutely right. He's globally recognized. So that's fantastic. Where does Lucas Murnaghan go next?
Well, lunch, I think, is the rest of you.
Yes.
And so I have no concept of time, so if we've gone over, I apologize. All of the things that I've done in my life where I've known what I thought I've known what I was going to do, have worked out pretty reasonably, and some of them haven't. But none of them have been anywhere near as interesting as the things that I didn't know were coming. So I guess if I say I don't know, that's good, because it means there's something else that's coming that I don't know what it is yet. And I shouldn't get too upset about the fact that I don't know. I should actually be relieved that I don't know. And if I did know, maybe it wouldn't be a very good thing. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You're trusting the process.
I mean, sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is getting what you thought you wanted, right? And sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is not getting what you thought you wanted. I, to this day, think that getting sick in 2007 was the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, I mean, probably better than that was, having great parents and having good health and being well supported and going to a good school and all those kinds of things. But the single thing that I give credit for the person that I am now and the perspective that I have and what I can bring to my patients or to my colleagues or to my trainees, I think it's made me far more empathic to my trainees than anything else could have. And then it's given me something to express through my images. So
It's beautiful. I think at that we have any other questions or commentary at all from anybody? So in the spirit of Mac Ortho, and I would say the brainchild of Mo Bandari, who makes all of us, inspires all of us, brings inspirational people here, all the guest speakers, and then pushes those of us around him, the faculty, the residents, the students. So being the amateur photographer that I am, I was asked to present you some of my work. So this came with a lot of consternation because here's me, Jay Morrow, giving Lucas Murnaghan a photograph.
that's great.
So my little bit of recon is I connected with Antonio over DM on Instagram.
Yeah.
And he was so gracious.
Antonio's my husband. Yeah, we figured that out.
So gracious. So he took a little bit of the nervousness away from me. But nonetheless, this is for you.
Oh, this is amazing.
If you do wish to open it.
I do wish to open it. Yeah.
I would love for you to enjoy that.
Are they all seeing what I'm seeing behind me?
Yes, they are.
Okay, cool. Now that
You know
I know
what that
I know
is.
that alleyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that of this that I love. It makes me. I mean, people who've been in Toronto know this. This is Graffiti Alley, right?
Just south of Queen Street.
Yeah.
Queen West.
Most of Rick Mercer's rants are filmed in that alleyway. A building has just been torn down, but yeah, street art is one of my very favorite.
Wow.
One of my very first favorite things. And that image.
I did not know that.
That's not working. If you see that little green thing up there, that's Uber 5000, who's an incredible graffiti artist who actually did a mural outside of our shop. If you ever see his little animals around, mostly around Toronto, but then I'm sure that they're spreading from there. But I love the reflection in the water. I love the composition. I love this down at the end. It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, Lucas, a pleasure.
Appreciate
a
that.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.